things make news, because like we said, if other president can come here and media is interested, there's no reason whatsoever why you'll have a president of when we call a country, a very strong economic, a country with a very strong economy like Nigeria, and with all the issues that are going on in Nigeria, like we said, there are 1,000,001 issues that you can discuss and talk about in the media as far as Nigeria is concerned. I was reading a day before he came, a day before he came on the Express, in the paper there was a column on Nigeria, and even the day after he came, but it's just like brushing over the visit and that's it. Well,
Grace, unfortunately, time again happens not to be obvious. You are tuned into Straight Talk Africa. We'll have more of our discussion in a moment, including our social media segment. So please, don't go away.
Like Voice of America on Facebook. Follow V.O.A. on Twitter. Join V.O.A. on our YouTube channel. Like, follow, join V.O.A.
This is Straight Talk Africa on the Voice of America. Call us now with your questions and comments. The number is 202-619-3111 and the U.S. country code is 1. Call us direct and we'll call you right back. Remember to turn down the volume on your radio or television and keep your comments brief. Now back to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Esther Gidhu-Ewart, and of course, welcome back to Straight Talk Africa, live from Washington. It's time to bring in our social media reporter, Esther Gidhu-Ewart. Take it away, Esther.
Thanks, Shaka. As always, we've received great social media feedback this week. As we've mentioned, Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari met this week with President Donald Trump at the White House. The two leaders talked about ways to enhance the strategic partnerships between the U.S. and Nigeria. And this leads us to our question of the week, which asked, what issues should top the agenda during the discussions between Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari and U.S. President Donald Trump? And let's start with a tweet from Ahmed Hassan from Somalia, who tweets, I think instabilities in West Africa and the growing Russian and Chinese influence in Africa could be key issues topping the agenda. Now to our social media comment of the week from Facebook fan Muhammad Ahmed Mansour in Monrovia, Liberia, who writes, the issues of security, good governance, peaceful transition of power, fighting corruption and kidnappings, and the fight against terrorism should top the agenda during the discussion between President Muhammadu Buhari and the U.S. President Donald Trump. Specifically, the issue of Boko Haram should grab the attention of the leaders. And let's go to another comment from Facebook fan Deodato Carls in Tanzania, who writes, terrorism should top the agenda because I have a feeling that if Nigeria's issues with terrorism are settled, this will mark the beginning of new Africa without terrorism. And our last Facebook comment comes from Moses Lochang, who writes, Buhari should warn America not to attempt to spread terrorism, weapons, regime change, and military bases in and around Africa. A reminder that we appreciate all of our audience feedback. If you are a new fan, drop us a line at africatv@voanews.com. To comment on our Facebook page, just enter the keywords Straight Talk Africa. Be sure to visit us online at voaafrica.com. To join our YouTube channel, sign up to VOA TV to Africa. Follow us on Twitter at VOA Shaka. Straight Talk Africa streams live every Wednesday on Facebook, or simply go to VOA Straight Talk Africa TV program page on our website. To watch us live on your mobile device, download the VOA mobile app. And now let's look at what's on tap for next week's program.
Next week on Straight Talk Africa, a look at the Golden Handshake, On March 9th, Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga publicly vowed to work together for all Kenyans, announcing that they had reached a deal to end the ethnic political animosity marking most political affairs in the country. That's next week, right here on Straight Talk Africa.
Now, well, Shaka, that's all for today from the social media comments. You and the guests have quite a number of social media comments to discuss. Back to you.
Thanks indeed, Esther. And of course, today we are talking about Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari's visit to the White House. And our guests are V.O.A journalist Grace Aliheri Abdu, Reverend Aniedi Okule, Executive Director, African Faith and Justice Network, and Dr. Baba Adam, Dean of Institutional Effectiveness, Merced College, California, who joins us live via Skype. I hope we are lucky this time. The three of you, of course, lady and gentlemen, again, you are most welcome, of course, to Straight Talk Africa, and I'm profoundly honored.
Thank you.
Exceedingly humbled, really, to have the three of you on the show.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Let's go to California, the Golden State. Can you hear me, Dr. Adam, this time?
Yes, I can hear you very clearly. Thank you for the invitation.
You're most welcome. I don't know whether you've been following the discussion here in the studios, but if in fact you were, you probably heard about what a lot of people thought would be the agenda, really, in as far as the meeting between Nigerian President Buhari and President Trump.
Yes, I heard the journalist and I heard the pastor. The meeting basically, on Nigerian point of view, was on security, violence, trade, and human rights. But I wish they would have expanded it more. So, no.
But what about the fact that the American media did not actually cover those issues?
Well, again, you know, we set our own agenda, but the idea is that, as you saw, the hoopla which happened when the French president came to White House with state dinner and everything, and there was a lot of things. Again, the coverage is extremely terrible, and the press conference that President Buhari himself did out at the Rose Garden in White House is not that well covered. So again, the U.S. press and media need to do a better job on Nigeria rather than just when, like the journalist, your host, is saying only when there is poverty, hunger, or problems in that. And again, you mentioned about the partition of Africa and Berlin Conference and so on, which is really a terrible. Only non-Africans are there, and the same thing is happening all over again.
Are you surprised about, you know, the fact that this really happened, especially when you know that the sort of colonial history you probably grew up on was in fact the history of Europeans in Africa? The Africans, in fact, were a backdrop on their own territory where they are supposed to be giants.
Well, again, the Africans need to, you know, we again need to get our acts together, and that will, you know, I don't want to say force, but the American media or American business or whatever to take notice of the Africans. But so far as we are playing second fiddle or third fiddle or fourth or whatever, they will just take us for granted, and again, they will perform things without our interest, just like in the 1880s when they, you know, sat down in Berlin and partitioned Africa. You know.
So
what about the Reverend?
Yeah, there is just to buttress that, there is a saying that until the lion tells its own story, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter.
Exactly.
You know, so, you know, actually, you know, that he's touching on that, both of them.
It is probably beyond simply a story.
Yeah.
It probably also involves behavior, really.
Both, you know,
and how you are perceived.
So actually, let me make a little background for a gravier indulgence. You know, I work for an organization, the African Faith and Justice Network, which was started by Americans. American missionaries who had lived in Africa for years. When they came back here, they noticed that the media was always portraying Africa in the negative light, in the negative light. So they set up this organization 35 years ago to try to combat this negative media presence and to try to do education to tell the story of Africa from an African perspective so that people understand. Having said that...
Let me take advantage of your being a man, of course, of the white collar.
Okay.
What about Dr. Livingstone's 3 C's? We're talking about commerce.
Yes.
That is trade.
Yep.
That is okay, because that's a sort of universal language.
Yes.
But even in that particular context, there is someone who gains more than the other. Then Christianity. Then civilization.
Yes.
What do those 3 things, what do those things mean, really?
Well, you know, again...
What does it mean when you say you're going to civilize somebody?
You say, you put it well when you mention, in the sense that you are trying to impose on another your own agenda.
Your cultural values.
Your cultural values, your worldview, and you've already come in with an air of superiority, so that you are doing violence to the culture and way of life of the people you think you are going to civilize, you know? So the 3 C's, let me pick it up a little, you know. Commerce, we ended up losing our raw material values.
We still lose.
We're still losing till today. Africa is now a continent of raw material extraction. We take something for $10, we process it for $2,000.
Why doesn't Africa add value? I have been hearing this business of saying, from the time I was a kid, that Africa consumes what it does not produce. Absolutely. And produces what it does not consume. When is this thing going to change?
Yeah, so the problem, you see, the problem is we appreciate, you know, something that comes from outside more than what we have ourselves. Like if you go to African countries, a lot of African countries, Nigeria inclusive, now, like right now, you have a lot of Chinese taking over our businesses. The same thing like traditional clothes that we make, now they will go and make it in China and come and bring it to Nigerian market, and Nigerians will prefer going to buy made in China. When you wash it, it's gone, than to buy what is our own. So we don't even appreciate what we have in the first place.
But that's also a function of colonial mentality.
Let me go to Dr. Adamu again, because obviously he didn't get the chance to you know, be part of the discussion. Dr. Adamu, I gather that you had actually been invited to come to Washington to meet with President Buhari. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Why didn't you come?
Again, you know, in the past, we have gone to Washington, D.C. In his last visit too, and we played some key role in helping in that.
I cannot hear you. What happened?
Okay. The reason is that we honestly think President Buhari was given a golden opportunity to straighten some of the perceived or perception or some of the things which the U.S. President Trump said about not only Nigeria but Africa. And we are not coming to Washington to support or play like what you say in that. Again, President Trump has said the S word not only on Nigeria but whole of Africa. Again, President Buhari claimed that it was maybe made up by media or so. In addition to that, President Trump has said that Nigerians, when they come and see Manhattan skyline, they will not go back to their huts. And again, there are other things like Charlottesville and other things. So we don't feel comfortable coming to Washington and playing unless President Trump respects Africa and black people worldwide. We don't have anything against him or against that, but we're not coming to Washington or anywhere unless he acknowledges and respects, you know, us.
But President Trump, I gather that he actually wrote a letter. It may not necessarily have been included the adjective of apology, but it was a sort of an apology that he sent it, in fact, to the chairperson of the African Union Commission, and that it was in fact accepted, or at least the language that was used was accepted by the entire leaders of the African Union.
Well, again, he needs to come out. Again, I'm not telling him what to do, but in our own opinion, he needs to come out to the television and discuss that. Rather, you saw it on the Rose Garden when he's, I don't want to say cutting off President Buhari, but he was saying that President Buhari knows me, I'm a good man, and so on. Again, this issue is beyond Nigeria. It covers the whole of Africa. Again, what we expect is President Trump and the United States to respect Africa.
What about the African leaders themselves?
Yeah,
if you, in fact, were to look in the camera, direct, just in case some African leaders were watching this Straight Talk Africa program, what would you say to them that they can do so that people do not really have the excuse of looking down upon Africa or using language that is not environmentally and culturally friendly to Africa?
Again, thank you. You know, I sent in, I don't want to say private communication, but I sent an email to President Buhari before he came to United States for this visit, that he needs to show dignity and respect for himself. If not, U.S. President Trump will not respect him. The same for whole African 54 or 52 or whatever countries we have. Unless we respect human rights, democracy, and denounce separatism, you know, we know the world will not respect us. Honestly, Africa have the best human resources and natural resources, and we can be country or continent second to none. And again, majority of African continent probably are under 30. When compared to Japan or Europe, the average or median age is around 60 years old. So if I'm looking to African leaders, please respect yourself, just impose yourself a term limit, and again, I'm not saying practice American democracy, but practice some form of democracy so that you are not running a country like the Cameroonian dictator for 28, 30 years, or like the former president of Zimbabwe, Mugabe, who was forced to, after he had a heroes for many years, have to be forced out. So to answer your question in short, in Africa, we need to get our acts together for President Trump or anybody to respect us.
Well, first of all, you know, let's face it, Africa is made up of at least 54 nations which are members of the African Union, plus, of course, Western Sahara.
Yes.
It becomes 55 in a way.
Yes.
He talks about how Africa has immense, you know, natural resources and what have you, but who actually benefits out of these resources?
The West.
Not only the West,
but
with some elements.
That's what I said.
In Africa.
You know, it's a function of governance. It's a function of leadership who mortgage the resources for short-term gains. And you look at, I mean, the gentleman there mentioned the enormous wealth in Africa is there, and many resources still prevalent throughout the continent.
Do you know how many Nigerians, for example, have property in Potomac?
Absolutely, not just Potomac.
And most of these used to be governors of states.
That's the point.
Military officers and what have you.
That's why I was bringing
no factories, no nothing.
That's why I was bringing up the issue of corruption. That this is something that we celebrated this current president, and people voted en masse. That you know the incumbent government was voted out because Nigerians understand how corruption has stood in the way of development. In fact, African bishops, entire African bishops, issued a joint statement in February 2013, and they said, corruption is like a cancer that stands in the way of Africa's development. And so, yes, from that perspective, any government, any African government fighting corruption is celebrated by the people. Nigeria's elite, in particular, have siphoned the resources of the country. That are buying, for instance, in the French Riviera, here in Malibu, California, in Potomac, go anywhere, in Dubai. They have properties that you wonder how they could possibly get those kinds of money and
in Hempstead, London, and you name it.
Name it.
But let's face it, when you talk about corruption, when it comes to Nigeria, really, let's face it, you have to accept that type of corruption is malignant.
It's
because,
evil.
Let's face it, when I was a kid, one of the first books I read about, really, which were written by the African intellectual literary icon, Chinua Achebe from your region.
Yeah.
You know, things fall apart, but no longer at ease, actually.
No
you
longer
begin to see it no longer at ease. And when it comes to man of the people, 1966, what has changed?
Yeah, you see, that's why I keep saying that, that somebody called Nigerians in diaspora economic refugees. That, like the saying, people that are sleeping with hunger in the midst of plenty. Nigerians, for instance,
and you are the most, as a community, you are the most highly educated.
Absolutely.
In the United States.
Absolutely.
Have no business going to foreign countries looking for means of livelihood in the midst of plenty with the resources that we have in our country. So a lot of people are being forced to go outside of Nigeria look at the number of people that are dying trying to cross to Europe.
Look at the number of doctors Nigerians actually have here.
2,500
in South Africa. Yeah. And yet when you go back to Nigeria,
we have that problem. Yeah. And even
it is the elite who have to go on some sort of medical tourism.
All the time.
And when they reach in those places, guess who actually
the Nigerians. The Nigerian
research has proved that even in the US, you have more Nigerians that are more educated than other immigrants that are in the United States. You have more educated people, coming from Nigeria in the United States alone. So, Nigerians are educated, Nigerians are hardworking, Nigerians are willing, and able. So, but our leaders have not created the enabling environment for them to strive, for them to prove themselves.
But in fairness, I think to President Buhari, honestly, I think, let's face it, I think he has tried so far. He's only been in power for 3 years. See a little bit he has sent a message in terms of people who are corrupt, except that his critics say that type of fighting against corruption seems to be, quote unquote, in their words, not mine, selective.
Yeah. Well, there is let me start, I'll come to that. Let me start to talk about the Nigerian elite. We have a government in terms of the Senate, the National Assembly, that is more expensive than maintaining the U.S. Congress. The average senator, lawmaker, they earns more money than the lawmaker in England, in France, in Russia, around the world. Okay, and you see that a state like Benue State, where there is this issue, they receive from the federal government about 105 billion naira.
Benue State?
Benue State.
Isn't that the state of Dr. Adam?
No, I'm from
Borno.
You are okay.
100, and it's a population of about 4.3 million. And the National Assembly gets 120 billion. And there are only about 2,000 of them. So you see, the cost of government, I know the president, this current president, when he came in, raised an issue about that. But the forces are so great that they don't seem to go beyond themselves. So the cost of government on top of the acute corruption that, is mind-boggling. It hampers the growth of the country. And I think that, let me sound a note of caution here. When you look at history, when you look at processes, you look at the Bolshevik Revolution, you look at you look at the French Revolution, okay? These are the kinds of things that the elite keep living as if there is no tomorrow, and if the population don't matter. And you have, in Nigeria, an educated young population, disenfranchised. And this government is, I mean, the National Assembly. I'm not talking about the presidency now. I'm talking about the National Assembly, the senators, the lawmakers are living as if everything is okay. Someday, if they don't take care, someday they will pay in a very hard way.
So you remind me of the Carnation Revolution, or the Captain's Coup in Portugal in 1974. Let me come to you again, because time happens not to be our best ally, really, Adama. What about the fact that President Buhari really has done at least something about Boko Haram? Boko Haram used to occupy, for example, 3 states, the size, in fact, of Belgium. But right now, they don't actually occupy any particular territory. Isn't that some kind of progress?
Well, yes, a lot of progress. First of all, I'm from Borno State. Actually, I'm born in Maiduguri, which is the epicenter of the Boko Haram establishment. A lot of progress have been made in terms of security. Right now, there is not a single local government area that is controlled by Boko Haram. Before, they were spread to the neighboring state of V.O.A. and to Adamawa. But there are still remnants of Boko Haram up in the Lake Chad area and in the surrounding area, say Cameroon and Niger Republic, and even up to Central Africa Republic. Definitely a progress has been made, but the Boko Haram is not totally eliminated. One of the things, if we will communicate or advise the government, is the Nigerian government need to address the root cause of the Boko Haram insurgency. Again, the people who created Boko Haram, like Senator Ali Modi Sharif and others, are free and becoming even a chairman of a national party in Nigeria, while you have thousands and thousands, of people, made homeless or refuge.
Do you have incontrovertible evidence on that? Because those are very, very serious charges.
Well, if you transfer money, well, first of all, Borno have a Ministry of Religious Affairs. They, Ali Modi Sharif created that, and again, you can just Google in that. So again, the people who created this mess are let free, and the Nigerian government is looking the other way. Like well, I'm saying,
unfortunately, my brother, really time is not our best ally. I have to go because we have to do something else, if you don't mind.
Definitely.
Thank you so very much, sir. Well, before we go, we would be remiss if we did not pay tribute to the late Professor Adebayo Adedeji, who died after a brief illness on April 25th at age 87. The Nigerian economist and academic was a full-fledged professor by age 36. He was responsible for the economic development and reconstruction of post-Civil War Nigeria. He also was appointed Under-Secretary General of the United Nations. Adedeji founded the African Center for Development and Strategic Studies, a non-profit think tank dedicated to multidisciplinary and strategic studies on Africa. May his eternal soul rest in peace.
Amen.
On that note, our guests today were Grace Aliheri Abdu, Reverend Nyedi Okule, and Dr. Baba Adam. Thanks to our affiliate stations, along with our viewers and listeners. For many of our Voice of America radio affiliates, Learning English is coming up next. And tomorrow morning is Daybreak Africa with James Bate. On behalf of the Voice of America, thanks for tuning into Straight Talk Africa. In the meantime, get better, not bitter Nigeria. And please remember to keep the African hopes alive.